This podcast is being held in the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people. We wish to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. This podcast is for mental health educational purposes only and should not be relied on as personal advice. Always seek the guidance of a health professional regarding your physical and/or mental health. Opinions expressed are solely those of the individuals involved and may not reflect the views of the Mental Health Foundation Australia. This episode features a personal story of mental health. If you find yourself distressed, please reach out to Mental Health Foundation Australia's national helpline at 1300 643 287 or Lifeline at 13 11 14.
Everyone has their own unique story. Empowering Voices of Harmony welcomes all members of the community to have open and inclusive conversations surrounding their lived experiences. Season 2 will introduce individuals from a range of diverse backgrounds who have found harmony and community despite their struggles. Hear from our guests in their native languages to obtain a full grasp of the difficulties and strengths that it takes to become a truly empowered voice.
Well, for whoever's watching, my name is Aret Muradyan, and I was actually born in Noble Park in Victoria to immigrant parents who migrated from Turkey, but our background is of Armenian. And my whole life I've grown up in that southeast ward, particularly in the Noble Park, Dandenong, Springvale area, and I was very much on my own in the sense that I had no siblings until the age of 12, and I learnt that to grow up in an area and like Noble Park, I guess, which was very multicultural and Anglo, you had to have some form of resilience, and you needed to learn how to create your own resilience in times of adversity, such that it was you had really no one else to turn to. So from a young age, I learnt how to fend for myself, how to do things on my own, and not really have my parents coming into the picture in the sense of having to go to them and complaining or crying to them. It was more of a, how do I work through certain things that have happened, whether it was in the public domain or whether it was at school. That, I believe, really taught me resilience as I grew up, and taking that into the workforce, and also, being around other friends and other family, and also teaching them how to be very resilient as well. Having said that, my parents are still alive. We very much dearly all love each other, my sister as well. But I think it was a fascinating journey where you either sank or you swam, as they would say, and I always chose that I've got to keep swimming, no matter which way the tide's going, because it's the only way to keep moving forward. My parents migrated separately with their own families, and they met in Australia. My father migrated to Australia in the late 60s, and my mother migrated with her parents around 1971. So I'm 50 years old now at the time of this recording, and Melbourne in itself was a very interesting place to grow up in, and I say that in a wonderful way. I always was fortunate to have friends that were from different multicultural and ethnic backgrounds, whether they were Greek, Italian, Turkish, Indian, Armenian friends as well from my background, and Australians as well. And I found that by assimilating amongst the different groups, it made it a lot easier. But there were times when, different subgroups would come into the suburb and would want to cause problems because of your ethnicity. But putting that aside, Melbourne is back in the 80s was wonderful. Like, we would be able to go into the city as a group of friends, and we would ride our bikes, and back then doing tricks on bikes were the biggest thing. And there was no real issues. There were no real problems as I would see it. Unlike today where Melbourne is very much changed. I unfortunately have seen, even through my career as a police officer, certain areas of Melbourne change where it's a lot more dangerous. There'd be areas even in the city at night where you would tend not to go to, whereas in the past you could. There was no real fear of going places, and I guess if you were street smart enough and saw certain types of people, you would know, I will avoid that. And that was one thing that I guess I embedded in myself, was having the capability of seeing what was going on around me and making a judgment call of, should I really go there or should I not? But growing up in Melbourne, I and my friends, we loved it. It was wonderful. Obviously dynamics change. I can't put a finger on as to why certain things have become what they have, but I guess globally, wherever you go, things are always going to change in society. So an interesting thing a lot of people ask me is how I actually ended up becoming a police officer. And this is a fascinating story which there'll be some form of resonance amongst the people viewing, and some will find it quite intriguing, if anything. So for a group of you watching, you may remember the Wall Street killings. For the younger generation who are watching, you probably don't really know or have heard of this, but a simple Google search will highlight a lot of the information that you need to find. During the late 80s, it was 1988, my parents actually used to own a milk bar at this particular point in time. I was still in high school, I was 13 years old, and I distinctly recall waking up one morning and the newspaper man would deliver the papers, and there in the front paper was an article in regards to two police officers that had been killed in what was known famously as the Wall Street Wall Street murders. I pick this paper up and I look at the front cover as a 13-year-old kid. And then I turn to my parents and I say, when I get old enough, I'm joining the police force. And then I put the newspaper down like nothing had happened. And as you can imagine, the look of horror on my mother's face as she turned to me and she says, 2 police officers have been killed and you're sitting here wanting to join a police force. What is wrong with you? And she turns to my father, and it's basically in our foreign language, in converted to English, says, tell him something, he's being stupid. I brushed it off. I let it be. I went on with my life. I went through high school, finished high school, as it was, and still had the desire to want to actually join the police or to become a lawyer. It was one or the other. And next thing I knew, at 19, I'd applied for the police force and was successful and got accepted. Now the interesting thing is, and I have a laugh because we look back now after retiring, and my mother and I have a bit of a laugh about this, and I distinctly recall my mum at this point in time when I was 19, she had no idea that I'd actually applied for the police. I'd kept it very quiet. And we're home one day and she says to me, when are you going to go and get yourself a job? To which I turned to her, and I'd only just received the letter of acceptance from the Victoria Police, and I hand this letter to my mother, and you can imagine she opens it up and she looks at it, and first thing she sees is the police symbol at the top of the letter, and she starts freaking out. What is this from the police? Why are they writing letters to you? What is this saying? So I got her to read it, and then she's like, what is it? I said, well, Monday I start at the police academy, and I have this big smile on my face. And, typical manner, she turns, gives the letter to my father and says, tell him something. He's being stupid again. And my father, in his wisdom, turned around and said, if this is what he wants to do, then let him do it and let him get on his journey and his path, because clearly this is what he's always wanted to do as a child. And that was the beginning, I guess, of my journey into getting into policing. Very, very different from a lot of people. I guess people say, oh, I want to help the community, which is something I've dearly loved doing while I was in the police force. But again, this stemmed from a 13-year-old kid who had that dream for nothing more than, I'm going to join the police and let's see where it goes. So coming from a migrant family into the police force at the time when I joined, which was in 1994, it was an interesting time. There were not a lot of immigrants. It wasn't as multicultural as what it is now. Like Victoria Police has done an amazing job in driving multiculture into the police force, which is great. And at the time, though, it was interesting. I remember being in the academy, and it was almost like the five of us who had an ethnic background, we were in separate classes. They call them squads. So people come in at every month into the academy, and you go through the course as it is. And it was almost like we all gravitated. There was about half a dozen of us. We would gravitate to each other at lunchtime. It was a bit of a safe haven, and that's not to say that there was anything disastrous happening in the academy. I think it was our way of parlaying our sort of growing up in society and what we had gone through, how we were finding the academy, how we would bring our little taste to certain situations and scenarios and trainings. And it was good to feed off each other, because the large population at the time was Anglo, and that's what it was. So it was hard for people who are not in an ethnic environment to understand where you come from and what adversities you deal with. But the good thing is that allowed us to actually educate people within our class cohort, so they had a better understanding of how to deal with people from certain aspects in society. Because not everyone, I guess, if I give you an example, not everyone, when you talk to them, I guess from, let's say, an Asian culture, will look at you in the eye when they talk to you, because it's a sign of disrespect. We understand that as ethnics because we're not too dissimilar. What you'd find is other police officers would get upset about it because they think, why are you not looking at me? Have you got something to hide? So it was a very good educational piece for everyone, and that's really sort of stemmed through and has become really good training for members that go through the academy, as well as people who have graduated with courses to upskill them as they've gone through their careers. So interestingly, growing up and even to today, I would always question my parents and ask them, what was it like when you came to Australia? What was it like living here? And not only my parents, but I think if you went outside today and spoke to migrant groups who came in the 50s, 60s, 70s, right? Every one of them would say the same thing. It was a lot easier to live here. You could leave your door unlocked. In fact, Mum said there were times when she would rush to work and leave the door open and come home from work and everything was still in the house. You could have milk delivered and not worry about someone coming and stealing it. You could walk down the street and everyone was social, everyone would talk to you. In fact, I remember my father even saying that era was the easiest era to be able to say walk out of one job if you didn't like it, and you could literally walk into the next building or the next factory and say, what work have you got? And their response would be, how soon can you start? So and I think that was great because it brought people to go out and work and use their skills. And clearly things have changed in, I guess, this last 50 odd years where you can't leave your door unlocked. We know that. That people say that trying to get certain forms of employment, there's so many hoops to jump through. And I don't know why they've maybe created those hoops, but there's so many people that have got such good skills. I think they're losing the art of having local people working in different jobs where they're very much the professional in being able to create good work, localized work, and actually create and bring that community, the sense of community, back together. Obviously, something's sort of fallen off the bandwagon along the way. I can't put a finger on it as to why, but that's in a 50-year span. In fact, it may be even if we went back 30 years, that way of living to then to now has vastly changed. Vastly changed. Off the dream of a 13-year-old kid who really didn't know much more about policing, but interestingly what I found was as I was growing up between the age of 13 and getting into the police academy, I would go to, back then they had police open days at the academy, and I would go, I'd catch the train and I'd go and I'd look at the horses and the dogs and the police vehicles, the highway patrol cars. They would bring the chopper in, and it gave me an opportunity to really sit and ask many questions to police to really get a really better grasp of what policing was all about. And I learned as I was getting older that policing wasn't just only going out and catching bad people, it was also helping people who were in need. It was also a job that at the time had over 200 plus different forms of employment within one umbrella, which was the Victoria Police. So you could be a highway patrol person for a while, and then if you wanted to be a detective, you could go and learn how to be a detective. If you wanted to be a person just working the police beat, and that's what you wanted to do, you could do that. There was no right or wrong. There was no hard and fast rule as to where and what you should do. It gave you that freedom of being able to pick and choose different forms of work and learn different skills, which I grasped. When I was in the police force, my I guess my resume is very different to some people who may have joined and have become a detective and have stayed as a detective, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly fine. When I first started, I started as a young police officer in St Kilda, when St Kilda was, as it would have been back in the day, like pretty full on. Back then, a year of working in St Kilda was the equivalent of working 2 years at any other police station. That's the amount of workload that we would be dealing with. And I loved it. It was great because it was always go, go, go. From there I went to highway patrol, did quite a number of years there, or the traffic operations group as it was called. Worked in an intelligence area for a period of time, which was fascinating, working with detectives and identifying different groups of people who were offending, and I guess mapping those things out and giving it to detectives to then work with. I worked for a period of time at the police academy. I loved it. I loved the teaching, the mentoring. I think at one point worked out I would have taught about 9,000 police and recruits and PSOs as well. And even to today, I still get people messaging me, thanking me for helping them through their recruit journey and becoming a police officer. And then while I was sort of in the police force still, I was finishing my law degree. So I've kind of come full circle of where I wanted to be one or the other. I went to the police, and then now I've done my law degree and been admitted as a lawyer. And then towards the end of my career, I worked in transit as a sergeant. I became a sergeant for quite a number of years, and I loved it. I loved the ability to sit there and mentor and train people and help them want to move through their career and map out a career path for them. And I really enjoyed that because it gave me satisfaction of seeing people who were driven, who needed the help and were willing to want to learn to get to where they needed to. And then ultimately I did a bit of time in prosecutions, which I loved, working in the courts as well. And then the unfortunate happens where over a large period of time you are exposed to a lot of traumatic events. And the traumatic events could be dealing with someone as simple as they've had a heart attack at home. Then you've got the family who are there. So that's a traumatic event. On top of that, you've got the trauma of road trauma fatalities, where sometimes you would go to a single car fatality. Others would be multiple people who have been killed in a car accident. And again, family members turn up to the scene. And you have no power. You're not a person who can heal and bring these people back. So it eats at you, unfortunately, because you feel for the people, you feel for the families. And, you know, it gets exposure upon exposure. You know, you work at transit, you see train fatals. This is the unfortunate part of the job. And as it would happen, you try to learn to brush it off. You try to learn to let it go. And for some periods of time that would happen. And several years ago, I guess it was the first time when I found that I was starting to having, I guess, recurring nightmares, dreams about things that had happened 20 years before. And you try and pinpoint it as to why is this coming back? Why do I even remotely have this coming back into my mind? And then there are days when you're at work or at home and all of a sudden you're tired, you're falling asleep. And, you know, you'd get a little bit of a clip by the boss because you're falling asleep in a meeting or at your desk, or you're at home and, you know, the family comes home and you're out cold on the couch. And we soon worked out that I had started to go through what's known as a mental injury, known as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'd taken a period of time off and was trying to work through how this had happened. Tried to get some assistance at the time, and, you know, and no fault of any of people within the police force, it was still, I think, wasn't new, but there was a lot of people who just didn't really know how to deal with it. And I understand it because it can be somewhat of a taboo subject. People have no real understanding of it. It's not like if you were to break an arm or a leg, you know, where people can physically see it. It's there, but it's not there, if that makes sense to the viewers. And for some people who are dealing with PTSD. So about 4 months into my first time off, I decided I'm going back to work. I don't want to be off work. I want to be there with my mates. And is it the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? I don't know. I'm not sure. I've always been a big advocate of doing personal development. So outside of work, I had always been someone who really read a lot of personal development books and or even went to seminars, nothing more than to learn more about myself and how I could grow as a person. I believe that helped me initially to be able to get back to work, but it wasn't resolved. The issue of the PTSD hadn't been resolved. But having said that, what I could potentially put my finger on is I became so busy in life that whilst I still had the symptoms of being tired, and every now and then you'd have these dreams, it was sort of like way in the back of my mind. So I just was busy. And then between that first event and then my second time, it would have been 7 years. And at the 7 year mark, it had really sort of taken its toll. And I knew within I wasn't feeling right. I wasn't suicidal or anything in that respect. But I just knew I needed to get help. And I reached out to my bosses at the time, told them, what I found is people are very scared to discuss this topic. People are very shy to raise it because of the perceptions in their mind of what people will think of them. People are scared because the first thing that comes to mind is, well, if I raise this and then I have it and then I'm off work, are they going to sack me? I've got mortgages, I've got a family, I've got kids to feed and a wife, I've got kids in school. That's a common theme, I think, not only within the police, but I think across the board with many people who are dealing with PTSD. So, you not only got ambulance, fire brigade, you have military. A lot of people in military exposed into some severe trauma when they're deployed. But also, having said that, it's not only just frontline workers. It could be people who have, there's a friend of mine who was in a very severe car accident and nearly lost their life, and they're going through post-traumatic stress and are getting the help that they need. So I put my hand up and took my time off, and suffice to say, I went through a lot of ups and downs, which is what a lot of people are going to do. And I guess for those listening or watching, reach out to people. Don't be scared to talk about it. Talk to your family, like my children, my missus. They knew all about it. I wasn't fearful of having anyone pushing back and thinking, oh, you're crazy, because the PTSD is a mental injury. It's not a mental illness in that respect. So it's a matter of getting people to be behind you, and then telling them as well, listen, just check in with me. I don't need you to ring me every day. I don't need you to hound me and come around to my house every day, but just check in or invite me. Let's go for a coffee, get me out of the house, whatever the case is. And I think they were good things to do. I did go through what's known as eye movement desensitization reprocessing, or EMDR. If you look that up, you'll find it to be fascinating. It's a process, a therapy that has been used from the 80s. They used it particularly with military folks. It's in Australia. A lot of people are, from a psychology background who have been trained in it are qualified to work it. Again, for me, I went through it. It's been an amazing blessing, where those triggers, those traumatic dreams, if we were to discuss it, I don't feel the pain as I would have. But I also think people who are going through this journey, and everyone has a different journey in the way they do it, have got to make that decision of, I really want to keep moving forward. I really need to get out of this position. So that's what I decided to do. Unfortunately, being the second time off, I was retired from the police force after nearly 3 decades. When I was advised that was occurring, a part of me, I guess, was broken, in the sense that that's been my life since I was 19. But I also learnt to not to be attached to the rank. Obviously, I retired as a sergeant. Not to be retired, or not to be connected to the rank, but to look at the job for what it was and all the good things you learnt and how you help people. And again, I'm a big advocate of when I see friends who are in the police force and we meet, I'm very open to discussing it. And what I've found is the more conversations that are to be had, the more people are then open and actually respond and say, you know what, I appreciate you telling me your story. I've found that sometimes I'm not feeling the best. It could or could not be PTSD, I'm not sure. And just reassuring your old work colleagues or family friends that don't even have to be in the police, but as I said, a friend who's been in a severe car accident, reassuring them that there is help, there is guidance, there is organisations out there. I guess as you're here today with the Mental Health Foundation Australia, they do an amazing job. They do a wonderful job with helping people in this particular space. Having looked at the different services they've got, it's open to anyone and everyone, and I advocate looking at getting some form of help through them. For, I guess, the police, fire brigade, ambulance people, if you're on Facebook, there's the Code 9 group. It's a private group that's dedicated to frontline workers. It's a safe haven. It's an amazing place where you will find people who are dealing with or have gone through the same things that I've gone through and that potentially you are going through as well. So the good thing with that is you're not alone. You can reach out to people. People are willing to help, discuss, chat, whatever it might be. So beyond, I guess, beyond PTSD, it's really taught me resilience, because you can take two paths when you come to that fork in the road, and that's to really spiral. And I get it. I've seen it. I understand getting into that dark place. What I've learned to realize is some people do, unfortunately, do the inevitable, which is end their lives. But then you find that they don't have the support. They don't have the people behind them. So please, if you are feeling that way, reach out to people. Reach out to the organisations. Reach out to your friends. And it could be a simple conversation. Now, let me preface this by saying that some people I thought that were really good friends, all of a sudden they ghost you. And what you realise is it's not that they want to ghost you, they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with asking the questions or having the conversations. And I understand it because what do you say? How are you feeling today? Well, I feel like shit, or this is what's happened. And people then become a little bit shy of, I don't want to trigger the person. I don't want to say something wrong and upset them. All you got to do is check in. Just check in with people. Hey man, let's catch up. Let's have a coffee. Out for a chat, and just talk about random things if that's what you're worried about, as opposed to ghosting people. So it's been a fascinating journey. One I look back at that's really taught me a great deal about myself, a great deal about how to work with it with other people and help them. And then the positives coming out of it, working with my treaters at the time, was they were never shutting me down to the possibilities of where and what I could do post retirement from the police force. So I was like, okay, cool, I want to get into the space of potentially being a lawyer. Great, keep your study, keep going. You might be doing a different course or might be looking at doing different things. Go out there and learn. Keep the brain functioning. Keep it active. Keep it doing different things. You might even find that you eventually love to get into something you've really wanted to do, and it could be as simple as pottery or painting. There's no right or wrong. For me now, my next exciting journey from this point actually is to continue to give back to community, and whether that's working with Mental Health Foundation Australia or not, but it's also understanding and putting my hand up to run for council for my particular area where I live in Victoria. And that's another reason, I guess, why I'm here talking about this. So for those people who are watching, understand that I get where you're coming from. If it's a a road that I'm given to work in, then it's an area that I would love to dearly try and bolster and help people who are going through mental health episodes, and how to get more help or get organisations to come into that particular area to actually be able to support the people, the residents, the community as it is. So many people ask me, what's it like to actually have PTSD? Because earlier, as I said, it's not a broken arm, it's not a broken leg, it's not something you can physically see. But as a number of examples, what I would find is sometimes I would go to bed, I would shut my eyes, and then the first thing I see, as an example, was a motorbike fatal that I went to. And it just comes up, it's like a video. In fact, it's fascinating because it's like a highlight reel of everything that's occurred at a critical incident, and it's playing out exactly as it happened, the conversations you may have had with colleagues, what you've seen, the different sights or smells that you may have had dealing with a particular incident. And then what I found, and this is just me, I didn't read it anywhere, but how I dealt with that when I was about to go to bed and all of a sudden it would pop up, I'd wake up frustrated because I want to sleep, but I would acknowledge it and go, okay, thank you for bringing that film up again, appreciate it, thanks for the reminder. Now, can we turn that projector off and let me go to sleep. So that's one thing that I would find, and it wasn't every day. It's not an everyday occurrence. Other times I would wake up severely sweating, and I would have had dreams and nightmares, and I can't even remember them. All I remember is waking up and I am absolutely soaking wet. And again, what I've been told is your body is in a fight and flight mode, and it's sort of toing and throwing with itself, and then your body's just trying to escape that particular scenario. Obviously you're sleeping and you can't, so the next best thing that happens is your body starts to sweat, and that eventually sort of wakes you up out of that dream. Other things I found were, I'll give you a classic example, was I worked the bushfires of 2009, and then later on, about 9 years later, again the bushfires. I won't go into too much detail, but we were the first sort of group of people that were sent to Black Saturday, and what we would have come across. I think you can work that out for yourself of what had occurred. Up until I did EMDR, which was 15 years later, I could cook a barbecue, but I couldn't sit at the table and eat with my family or friends without having to rip my clothes off, have a shower, get freshened up, put new clothes on, and then go and sit with my family, because that smell, that burning smell, was so severe that it just kept triggering me, and I just had to I had to wash myself. I couldn't sit with family. And everyone deals with it differently. EMDR, phenomenal. I loved it. I can't thank my particular treater enough. We worked through it, and EMDR was fascinating because it brought up so many suppressed memories, and this is PTSD. It suppresses everything, and if you look at it from a fascinating point of view, it's because so much content is recorded in our human brain that I was reciting word for word conversations that I was having with people at any one of these particular critical incidents that I had gone to, right down to where I was standing, what was going on, where people were, what was happening around me. It's actually fascinating, but the sad part is because at the time you deal with a critical incident and then it's like, okay, cool, now let's go to the next job. You don't really deal with it, you don't process it. So what's happening is, as I've been advised, is the filing cabinet's been left open and the videos just keep playing. It hasn't been resolved, there's been no resolution. So again, I'll bring EMDR up. For me, it worked, it's been phenomenal. it's designed to allow the body or the brain to realize that that event doesn't occur anymore. It was a long time ago, and then it resolves it. It puts it to bed. You know, other things. I remember driving past a car accident. I remember my son saying to me, "Oh, it looks like a car's smashed into a tree." That reminded me of a fatality that I'd gone to, and I had to stop. I couldn't go past it because I didn't want to see it or deal with it at the time. And I think in a positive way, my son seeing that, it really gave him an understanding of, okay, I get what you're going through. I understand it. So, as I said, from day one when I went off work, I explained everything to my immediate family, so to my kids and my partner. So none of them were left in the dark. None of them would be left wondering. I had other friends who were in the police who were going through the same journey, so we were able to communicate openly. My neighbours who had come from overseas in the 90s from wars that were occurring in Europe, so they had been dealing with their own style of PTSD from what they've seen. So it was a matter of being open, and I'll repeat this, you're going to be like, this guy's repeating it 100 times, but being open to conversation is the key. Now, whether people like it or not, it's irrelevant. But the ones that don't like it, it's because they don't get it. They're too scared to discuss it. For me personally, there's nothing more than that. What happened, though, is I couldn't tell my parents. Until the day I retired, when that day came, in February of 2024, I couldn't bring myself to actually explain those journeys and what had happened to my mum and dad, because I knew how upsetting it would be for them, having obviously come from Europe at the time when there was a lot of internal political issues happening at the time where they came from. So when I told my mum, she started to cry and she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Well, if I told you these things that I'd already started feeling a long time before now, I know you would have forced me to want to leave." And I never wanted to leave the police force. I just wanted to keep helping the community. I wanted to keep doing what I was doing great things at, which was helping the community, helping my staff, helping people come through the academy. But as I said before, I'm at peace with it now. I guess I've left some sort of a legacy for people to run with in the police force. And then there's a new journey, obviously, trying to run for council, which again brings me back to working with the community and hopefully advocating and trying to help those who are in need again, in whatever manner they need help, because there's a lot of people who are in vulnerable positions, whether it's where we talk about a housing crisis, an economic crisis, and not to get political by any stretch, but people are hurting in all aspects, and it's like, how can we actually help people? How can we help them to be in a better place? Because it's being in a better place which then puts you in a better mental place, which then has the cohesion, the family, without all the breakups and all the fallout that can occur. For me personally, and I can only talk about myself because I have friends who are on their own journey and might have a lot more complex PTSD, where it's a lot harder to deal with. And again, mine was very multi-layered as well, was a complex form. I personally, in my own mind, I was always a big believer that I'm going to fight whatever this is. I'm going to work through it. I'm going to seek the right guidance and help. But I'm also not going to be afraid of discussing it and talking to people. So, my friends who know that I'm coming here today, they're fascinated. They're like, how did you all of a sudden end up on a podcast with the Mental Health Foundation of Australia? And I said, that's a great question. Vasan, who obviously runs the organisation, has done a fantastic job. We were just having a mere conversation only a week or so ago. He was fascinated about my journey in policing and legal and going into community through council. And I guess the first question that came out of his mouth, like a lot of people do, is, well, you know, you were in for 3 decades. What happened? Why did you leave? And again, I was just open to it. I said, well, Vasan, unfortunately, it came to a point where PTSD had sort of become prevalent, and it was, I guess, no longer conducive to be within the organisation, and that's sort of how I've ended up being where I'm at. And then for Vasan to say, great, I need you to do a podcast. Are you willing to come and talk to the many? And I said, absolutely. So here I am today, talking to however many people are out there watching. I want to thank Mental Health Foundation Australia. I love everything that they're doing. I want to thank you all for allowing me to come to this podcast and to give people my journey. And I think a lot of people will resonate with it. And don't be afraid to just reach out.
Thank you for listening to Empowering Voices of Harmony. Mental Health Foundation Australia is grateful to our guests for sharing their lived experiences, offering hope and a voice to others. The Mental Health Foundation Australia offers free mental health support groups on various topics, from anxiety, trauma, bipolar disorder, and many more. We also offer affordable counselling sessions at $20 per session at our Wellness Hub Psychology Clinic. Our podcast notes include helpful resources. We hope you found this episode informative. See you next time as we share more empowering voices of harmony.